And then it is my pleasure to welcome New Mexico House Representative Chris Chandler today. Representative Chandler is a longtime resident of Los Alamos County, serving her first term in the New Mexico House of Representatives, District 43, which is Los Alamos, Rio Arriba, Sandoval, and Santa Fe counties. Her legislative committee assignments include House Taxation and Revenue and Judiciary. How was that?
All very exciting.
Great.
And fun and interesting. And
good. Prior to her election to the New Mexico House, Representative Chandler has been a two-term Los Alamos County councilor and has worked on numerous local civic boards and commissions. Before her retirement, she was a Los Alamos National Laboratory lawyer and group leader, having managed the litigation group in Office of Laboratory Counsel. Representative Chandler has law degrees from Boston College and Georgetown University Law Schools. Please join me in welcoming Representative
oh, of course. Thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to report that I feel that we had a very successful session. And before I go into that, I just want to encourage all of you to feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions. I frankly find that a much more enjoyable format than just me sort of reiterating a bunch of facts and figures and that kind of thing. So don't be shy, ask questions. I'm very open to trying to answer questions, and if I don't have the answer right here, right now, I can always get back to you in terms of follow-up. As I said, I really feel like we had a great session. The House introduced more than 600 bills. The Senate introduced more than 600 bills. So we were talking up on the order of over 1,200 bills, and over 300 bills actually passed, and the governor, I think, signed on the order of 250 or so. And those are rough numbers. And I think there was a lot of pent-up interest in a lot of things that have stalled over the last decade or so. So people were raring to go because many of the bills had been introduced in the past. Some of them have been fine-tuned, and many of them made their way through committees. As Ren said, I'm on Taxation and Revenue and on Judiciary. Those are both committees that I asked to be assigned to. Tax and Rev in particular. When I was running, I talked a lot about education, and people are very interested in education in this town as they are across the state. But to ensure that we have a sound, sustained, strong education system, we need strong, sustained revenues. And the concern of many of us, particularly in the House, is that we cannot continue to rely on the oil and gas boom to keep the state running. And we have been fortunate that this year we had a surplus. We don't view that surplus as a reoccurring surplus. And as a consequence, we need to be looking for other avenues to support the infrastructure and school systems and other activities that are crucial to making the state one that people want to come to, live in, and that businesses want to come to and live in. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what we did in tax, and then I'd review a little bit about what happened in education, which was a lot, and a few other items as well. So, and as I said, please interrupt. This year, Tax and Rev really tried to approach it as a way to, as I said, look for additional revenues. And eventually, I think we'd all like to move towards tax reform. So what does tax reform mean? We rely very heavily on gross receipts taxes at the state level and at the county level. And there are communities in this state that are approaching a 9% gross receipts tax. And it's not inconceivable that if we continue on the path that we are on, some of those communities could reach as high as 10%. And that is not something that we view as a business-friendly outcome. So we need to diversify. And Tax and Rev look very hard at diversifying, and a number of things happened that are moving us in that direction. I don't think it's moving us far enough, but so we did finally implement an internet sales tax. That should help a lot of communities that rely on, we do a lot of mail order here in town, I'm sure, and I would expect that the rural communities do as well because they don't have the bricks and mortar stores that we do and the metropolitan areas do. So that's going to happen. It's going to be phased in that the state will immediately be able to apply an internet sales tax. And there's a kind of a 2-year transition period where the systems are getting set up so that local communities will get their share of the local tax. And there were provisions that are going to give some additional monies to local communities as a kind of a transitional period before they start collecting internet sales. So I think that was a really good thing, and we're all excited about that. The excise tax was increased by a little bit. We added a little bit of progressivity into the personal income tax system. So we're trying to move the system, or at least some of us are trying to move the system towards a more progressive system. There was no gas tax, although there was talk of a gas tax. We changed the capital gains tax slightly, so the deduction has been dropped to 40% as opposed to what it is now, 50%. With these various changes, we expect to increase revenues by $70 or $80 million a year, which really is not adequate to address our needs. But as I said, it's a first step. There were legislators who were uncomfortable with the idea that given us being as flush as we are, that we should not be raising taxes or looking for other additional revenue streams, and that's where there were negotiations between the House and the Senate. There were philosophical differences between the houses, and this was how it was resolved. My perspective is this is exactly the time to be looking at tax reform when we're not in a crisis mode. 2 years ago, 2016 was a crisis for the state. We were running into a deficit, and the state was scrambling to find monies and scraping back monies from various reserve funds. Our reserves dropped as well. We've now built our reserves up again, and we're trying to maintain a 20% reserve level, our rainy day fund. So that's what's going on in tax, and I'm hoping to be working on tax issues throughout the summer. In terms of education, I feel really good about where we're at. Yes, sir. Oh, hi, John.
Hi. So before you move on to
Sure.
on the tax reform,
Yeah.
I want to just clarify. So there is some talk that that we do have that oil and gas tax that revenues coming in,
Sure.
but as they say, that may never last forever. And I fully hardly agree that we ought to take advantage of that. But I also, you can't just stop taxing people. You can't just, because everybody's got there's always going to be some funds that need to be raised in a local community, if nothing else, to pay for the rec center or whatever.
Sure.
So is the general consensus, or could you, I just want to clarify that, is that, you like I say, you don't want to bring, like a couple years ago, you don't want to bring tax back to everybody in the state, but on the other hand, you just can't say, okay, we're going to drop all the income taxes or the gross receipts tax because now we've got all this other tax coming in.
Sure, John. And in fact, that's not the direction we're moving into. So we made a small increment on the top tier of the personal income tax. We increased a few other taxes, and GRT is staying where it is right now. There was talk of trying to drop the state portion of the GRT by half a point or so as a means to start moving in the direction of dropping the GRT, because many of us believe we rely too heavily on that. But because we could not, well, this is my interpretation, we weren't able to negotiate on some of these other revenue streams. We had to maintain the state level GRT just so that we could accomplish some of the goals that we're trying to accomplish in terms of education, infrastructure, and so on. So we're really not dropping taxes at this point to any significant degree, but ultimately the goal is to try to bring down and lessen our reliance on gross receipts tax across the board and look for other more modern approaches to taxation and revenue creation. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so, there are some philosophical differences between the House and the Senate, and I'm anticipating that those will be worked out over time, and so there we are. It was really interesting for me. It was my first year on tax, and I expect to be a little bit more knowledgeable when I come back and talk to you guys next year. But I enjoyed it very much, and it wasn't a totally new kind of concept because having worked on the county council, the whole idea of taxation and so on is something that I'm very familiar with. I should note, of course, and you're probably, of course, all aware, the lab GRT tax bill went through as it did last year, and this year the governor signed it. And by the way, the House passed that bill unanimously. I'm very proud of that fact. We worked out a negotiation with the Republicans, all of whom who were present in the room voted for the tax. And so it was a broad support for that, and people recognized that was an important and equitable thing to do across the state. So in terms of education, I'm sure many of you have been following it. This is a very important issue for this community as well as the state. We increased teacher salaries at the various steps. And in addition to that, we are giving teachers a 6% raise and public school employees. We've increased funding to K-5 plus programs. We increased the at-risk factor in the public school funding formula so that it will generate additional funds for schools that are in disadvantaged and poorer communities. We increased the appropriation to public schools by $450 million. We've increased funding for professional development. At the request of the governor, the legislature approved an early childhood education and care department, and that department will be responsible for New Mexico pre-K programs and child care, home visiting, that kinds of thing. So there will be a specific department focused solely on early childhood so that we can get our children to the place where they're ready to learn when they come to school for kindergarten. And that's going to be a big push, and I'm expecting the governor is going to be focusing very heavily on that and her staff. We did not increase the draw on the permanent fund. As you know, over the last number of years, there's been a talk about a constitutional amendment, putting it to the voters to see whether or not we should draw out an additional 0.5% or 1%. The numbers vary. And that did not make its way through. It did make its way through the House. It did not make its way through the Senate.
So I have a question.
Sure.
What's being done to curb the drug problems in the schools?
What's being done, I do not know. That's a responsibility of the schools. We're certainly providing more funding. We did actually pass a bill that encourages the community school concept, which I think is an important way to try to address. Community schools have wraparound services. That's the concept, where you're actually bringing services into the schools. It's a voluntary program, so schools have the availability of counseling and those kinds of activities. In Los Alamos, there's a great push here locally, and I think we need to compliment our local school board and county council in terms of there have been a lot of forums here in town in terms of what to do with some of the kids in crisis here, and we are funding, I was able to get some funding for the public health office, and I know that the county council here is going to be providing some funding in collaboration with the schools, and there are some counselors in the audience, and you can help me with this, but there is an effort here to provide specific counseling services, make it more broadly available, and that initiative is happening right now. So we here are increasing, the plan is to increase hours for our public health office. Right now, I think it's down to a couple of times a month, although apparently there's always a secretary here, but there's not services here. And I know that the schools and the council are themselves working on bringing in other kinds of services. But I'm very excited about the community school concept. And there are community schools in Albuquerque and other areas where you're looking at the whole child or the whole student, and you're providing services to try to support them. So that is something that the legislature did support and endorses and continues to endorse. Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm. Good. So as I said, education, I think we're doing very well on in terms of trying to move the state forward. That was clearly of interest to just about every legislator in both houses. I think people knew it was of critical importance, and people took it very seriously. In terms of budget highlights, the budget has been increased by 11% in terms of appropriations. Pre-K funding was increased by 24 million, child care assistant 9 million, home visiting. So we are increasing funding and expanding programs in a lot of these areas. In terms of the business issues that I'm sure you're all interested in, I co-sponsored a bill with my colleague who is a former Sandia scientist to increase tax credits for the labs when they do work with small businesses. So we essentially doubled that. And boy, that was a popular bill. My colleague was the one who suggested that we do it, and the room was filled whenever we went to a hearing on that bill. So I'm hoping that will spur and assist the lab in terms of its outreach to small businesses. As I said, we worked on the tax bill. There are a couple other, what I consider, business type bills. And one that's not talked a lot about is the water production bill. And that's a bill, right now in the southern part of the state, especially in the Permian Basin, a lot of water is being used to support the fracking activities in the oil and gas sector. And frankly, it's creating problems. There's concerns about the stability of the aquifer, and it's drawing water from other, agriculture, really. So we passed a bill that will allow essentially the recycling of water for use in the production oil and gas fields. It is in some sectors a controversial bill, and there's going to be, regulations will need to be developed to ensure that it's implemented correctly. Environmental issues, of course, are something that are going to need to be addressed, but it has the potential for really mitigating the negative effects that the fracking industry is having on agriculture in the southern part of the state. And so that was something that we got through and the governor signed. There's also the Energy Transition Act, and that's a pretty specific bill that was designed to address how PNM is going to withdraw from the San Juan coal power plant. PNM announced a few years ago that they were getting on, I think it's 2022 or 2023. And this provides a transitional period that allows some things for PNM in terms of how they cost the closure expenses. And it also provides job training and severance packages for the workers. There are about 450 workers that are going to be impacted by what's going on. It's also going to encourage the placement of renewables in that four-corner vicinity, and it imposes certain renewable energy requirements on privately held utilities and co-ops. So it's it's a package that includes things that PNM and the private sector get, and it also pursues public policy goals that some of us think are very important, particularly for that region. What that also was sort of controversial, frankly, the business community got behind it, and a large majority of the environmental groups were behind it. There's only one environmental group that I know of that was opposed to that bill. Sierra Club, Conservation Voters, the large environmental groups were very much behind it because it has strong renewables in it. And the business community was behind it because to some degree, it is disruptive for the area around Farmington, and the Farmington business community is very concerned about what's going to happen there. And I think those of us in the legislature recognize that, and we plan to do whatever we can, even moving forward above and beyond this bill, to try to ensure that there's a softer landing for a very difficult situation up in that area. Let's see, what else? Oh, some of these are smaller and some of these are bigger things. We passed a short-term rental bill, and I thought maybe people in here might be interested in that. So prior to this bill, I think you needed 3 rooms or some number in that vicinity before your short-term rental was subject to lodger's tax. And that has been changed to any number of rooms. So it's 1 room. So there are a number of communities that have just one room kind of short-term rentals, and that's going to help. I was talking to the mayor of Jemez Springs, and they have a lot of this going on, and he was just thrilled. He thinks that's going to increase his revenue stream for his community, fairly significantly. So, that was a good bill, and those are the kinds of things. If you have any other questions, I'm on the business kinds of things. I'm happy to address those. Let's see, what else? Healthcare. We are pursuing studies for healthcare for all, Medicare for all, as well as the Health Security Act. We did a few other things. So we established a licensure program for something we're calling dental therapists. There's a real concern in the state about the lack of professionals in rural communities, so healthcare professionals. And we have been looking for ways to bring in intermediate providers, because it's very hard to get physicians in some of these communities, or in this case, professional dentists. So we've established a licensure program, so it's sort of a mid-level, so cleanings and that kind of thing, some basic healthcare, dental healthcare that can be provided by not the top of the, not the top tier professional, but the next tier. And so we are looking for methods to improve on that. We passed a licensure program for naturopathic doctors. We passed a mammogram disclosure law. We passed a law that requires all healthcare providers to provide contraception as part of their array of services. So that we were working on all of these kinds of things.
Can you explain that?
What do you mean explain?
Like the contraception thing?
The contraception law requires every insurer to provide at least one form of contraception in each of the kinds of categories. That's drug and device. So that's what the law provides. Yes, ma'am.
In that same vein, I was wondering if you could address, there's an old law in the books
Oh,
in
yeah.
New Mexico about abortion.
Sure.
And how did that not get changed?
It didn't pass. I mean, that's kind of the short answer, but the long answer is yes, there is a 50-year-old unconstitutional law on the books of New Mexico, and there was a bill, HB 51, that proposed to repeal that law. It made its way through the House and did not pass the Senate. And so that's kind of the story on it. And I know there are many people that are disappointed by that, but that's where we are with that.
The pushback, what was the pushback? Or can you address that?
Well, I can't speak for what was going on with the senators who voted against the bill, truthfully. Honestly, I can't speak for them.
But there was more involved, though, Representative Chandler, than just repealing abortion law. There was way more involved in that bill, so maybe you could discuss that.
Actually, no, it's not. That's really what the law, that's what the bill did. It repealed the law that is currently on the books. That's what the bill did. I understand there was a lot of misinformation that was being provided from all sides, but that's the essence of what the bill did. And if you have additional information you'd like to share, I'm happy to address it, but that's what the law did. Yes, sir.
I have an interest in your remark about Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of strategy that is being worked with this concept? Because I would assume that there would be quite a lot of stakeholders that would be against such a move.
Sure. As I said, it's a study. It's not an implementation. So all of those kinds of issues will be addressed. And what typically happens with studies is there'll be public meetings, and I'm sure it's going to be the Health and Human Services Committee that addresses this issue. And yeah, there will be many stakeholders that will have various issues on that, on how we proceed with some form of public provided health care.
And what is your position?
I don't know, because I'm waiting for the study. I did support pursuing the Health Security Act, as I know the chamber came out in favor of pursuing a Health Security Act, as many chambers of commerce and many municipalities and local governments did. So. Any other questions?
Just
Oh, Patrick.
a couple of comments. First, I'd like to applaud the legislature for focusing on education so much. Oftentimes people don't understand the link between economic development and education. We're lucky here and that our local school system is so strong, but my colleagues across the state, both in terms of business attraction and then business retention, have a very difficult time with that in terms of the quality of the workforce that's coming out of the local school systems, and frankly, the quality of the education their employees get. So economic development and K through 12, and even post-secondary education are integral to economic development. Another comment, I know there was if I'm correct, there was an increase in the state LEDA fund from 50 million to 60 million this year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I forgot about that, Patrick.
Which
Thank you.
is great.
Yep.
And LEDA is the state's fund
Right.
that they use to help businesses either relocate to the state or, I think more importantly, and have more successfully help existing businesses grow and expand in the state. And that's where the majority of the LEDA money has been spent over the years.
Right.
We've had a company here utilize that money in Los Alamos. We have a second company right now pursuing funding through that. The other main incentive program that I think still needs some attention is the JTIP program. That's a job training program in the state that has been consistently underfunded in terms of the applications that have gone in. What that does is allow qualified businesses to apply when they hire a new hire in the state, and the new hire must have lived in New Mexico for a year, so it's a local person. They can apply to have the state reimburse the company 50% of that person's salary for the first 6 months that they're employed. There's rules on how you qualify for that, but it's a huge incentive, both in terms of recruiting companies into the state, but again, more importantly, existing companies being able to grow and expand and have some assistance. And that fund has been overcommitted every year, year after year.
Yeah.
So I just encourage you to, in
sure.
the next session, which will be mainly budget, if there
Yeah.
is a way to continue to
Okay.
increase that. Those two programs are
thanks.
very important to us.
Yeah, thank you for that point. And I really, just as a local official prior to my becoming a representative, we saw the usefulness of LEDA just on a local basis here. And Los Alamos County certainly uses LEDA to support things, including, I think, our affordable housing project. We're going to be using LEDA as a money. So, well, maybe we're not. Are we, David?
It's a different exception.
Different,
from
okay.
the
Okay.
donation.
Okay.
Similar.
Yeah, similar concept. But yeah, I agree with you. And definitely LEDA is very important. We can talk some more about what we can do on JTIP next time we get together. In terms of, we also did some criminal justice reform, which I think was very important. We're trying to put more monies into diversion programs, and of course we're finding that just locking people up is not the most productive way to address crime. We really need to pull back and try to address the causes and work to move people in the correct direction. Prison is not generally the way to achieve strong outcomes for the people who are making the,
So what kind of diversion programs are in place?
The diversion programs now are allow a police officer and prosecutor to decide not to file charges if there is if the individual involved meets certain criteria. And what we did this year was to expand the criteria to allow for people who may have been convicted of one felony that's a non-violent felony to be eligible for pre-prosecution diversion. That's the provision that we adopted this year. There was a smaller pilot kinds of programs across the state, and we're trying to expand on them. We also increased funding for behavioral health programs in the jails, which I think is very important. We are also developing programs so that when someone's about to be released from prison or jail, we're enrolling them in Medicaid immediately if they're eligible, and they start the process in jail so that there's not a gap period after they're released. And we're trying to develop programs so that someone who is about to be released from prison or jail have the resources before their release so that they are starting out on a good basis and not getting derailed the moment they're released from prison. We passed an expungement law, which allows people after a certain period of time to apply to have their records expunged if they meet certain criteria. Not all crimes are included, so sex crimes, are not included. Fraud is not included. DWI is not included. There are a few exceptions. Yes.
There was some talk on employer job applications about banning.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that was a long time ago.
No.
What happened with that?
Okay, so I think it was last year or the year before, there was a ban the box for public employers. Okay, so the state banned the box, meaning, and what ban the box means is you can't have on the initial application those questions about, yeah, exactly. Have you ever been charged? I think the question is charged even. So that was banned a year or two ago, and I can't remember what session we did that, probably in 2016. This year, we expanded that to include all employers. So it doesn't mean you can't ask people about their criminal record. What it means is the initial application can not ask about it. And the goal there is to allow people to get to the next level of the interview, where at that point, that question is appropriate and acceptable and is fine. But we're trying to get beyond the point where you're just screening people out for, it could be a marijuana charge, or some things that an employer might say, I understand, we'll move beyond that. But you can ask it at the interview level, but not at the first kind of application level. So that did happen this year. So that was part of our criminal justice reform package. I hope what I imparted, minimum wage bill passed, I should mention that. So by 2023, I think we'll be at $12 an hour. It's going to be stepped up over time. We increased the restaurant workers a little bit. We did not proceed with the idea that minimum wage should apply to the same minimum wage should apply to waitresses and so on. We upped it a little bit, but not to the degree that we did for other workers. We created an ethics commission, consistent with the constitutional amendment that we all passed last year. And we passed a law that allows for same-day voter registration. So there were a lot of things going on this session. I have to say it was really an honor to be working for all of you. It felt very productive and very exciting, and people were energized. So just sort of some fun facts. There were 20 new representatives in the House this year, brand new. The Democratic caucus now has a majority of women in the caucus, and we have a number of women in leadership in the Democratic caucus. I'm very proud to say that. I feel that the Speaker's office was very fair and provides very good support for all legislators. Let's see, what else? People were very excited just to be working with the governor, who, by the way, was very collaborative with the legislature, had many meetings with our leadership. She has legislative liaisons who are very active in terms of working with me, for example, helping me talk to the health secretary about getting funds for the public health office here in Los Alamos. Extraordinarily responsive in terms of just my own personal experience. So for example, I raised the issue with the liaison, and like a day or two later, I'm talking to the secretary on the floor of the House. She came down to see me. I mean, who could ask for anything better than that, where there's really a team effort from my sense. We don't all agree. Certainly the governor had a different agenda from some of us, and certainly we had a different agenda from some of what was going on in the Senate. But clearly there's a different tone, and there's just a whole level of enthusiasm about moving the state forward that I hadn't seen in quite some time, really 10 years or so. It's been a long time where the energy is there. And I completely agree with what Patrick said. If we want businesses to grow in this state, we need an educational system that's going to support that effort. And it's not just college education, it's vocational education, and job training education, and all of those things. And I feel like we are all moving in that direction to ensure that that happens. So having said all that, I hope this was useful to you, and I look forward to, you can always call me. My phone number and my email address is on the legislative website if any of you need to contact me. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I have
Okay.
a really naive procedural question.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I don't know. You were clearly working on a lot of different things when the session ended.
Yeah.
Do those just stay on the desk so that you can resume where you were at the next session?
If a bill died, it died, and what you need to do is refile it.
Right.
And what people do is they kind of listen to maybe what was the problem with the bill, and they might tinker with it a little bit and refile if they feel strongly about it. But it doesn't just, you don't bring it up again. You have to refile the bill, really, at that point.
I'm thinking about before it gets to that stage, the negotiations and interactions, drafts and things. Never mind, it's not that big.
Yeah, okay. I will say that one thing that happens during the summer, and this is something that us newbies didn't have the advantage of, was there are all kinds of interim committees that go on starting around the end of June all the way through December. And that's where a lot of the bill ideas and policy things are discussed, and those are often the fuel for bills that are filed before the session starts. So I'm hoping to be really active this summer on some of the committees. I'm real interested in water as well. Yes, Dave?
That leads me to another
Sure.
question on procedure. You're a part-time legislature. Is there a staff on these bills that does work through the year to do research and that kind of
Yeah.
thing? And if so, how does that work? Because it sounds really interesting. Like you get together for 2 months every year.
I know.
Run as fast as you can,
Yeah.
and then start over again. But is there a professional staff that works for this?
Yes, okay, so legislators don't have personal staff. So I had a half-time secretary just during the session. So I think leadership has some staff. So for example, the speaker has some staff full-time, but that's it. But there's something called the Legislative Counsel Service. That is the bill drafting organization, and that's a relatively large staff. I can't give you the number of people. So if I'm interested in some tax thing, and there's also LFC staff, so there are financial people as well. So one or the other I can contact and say, I'm kind of interested in this as a concept in terms of pursuing. And they will go help me find information about what that's about. And they will help draft the bill. But that's all, really. None of us have our own personal staff. And again, that staff is serving over 100 people because there are 70 House members and there are 40 some odd senators, and they all just rely on this sort of pool of people who assist, and most of them have specialties. So there's somebody who does a lot of water stuff, there are tax people, they're kind of they're divided up. But basically, we rely just on this sort of pool of people, and they have limited amounts of time and so you can't really expect in-depth research. I'm fortunate because I'm retired from the lab now. I have the time and the ability to do a lot of this work myself, but other legislators don't have that luxury and don't necessarily have a background. So I have a legal background. I know how to look stuff up and pursue research, but some of the others don't have that skill set, and they don't have the time because they're still working. There are a lot of educators. There are a lot of public school teachers in the House, and they're busy a lot of the time. And it's a difficult. It's difficult, really, frankly. And what you do is you rely on some of the either lobbyists or special interest groups who often educate you as well. And you need someone to vet that for you, frankly, because you're getting a certain perspective usually when you're relying on groups such as those folks. Yes, John?
Christine, this session was a write the rules session. And the next time, don't they focus on the budget next year? So I think any business person here would say there's no way you can run a railroad that way.
Yeah.
So is there talk to get away from that concept? Because I mean, there's always gonna be a financial issue, you know, you had financial issues this time,
Yeah.
which really should be delegated till next year. And there's always laws and issues that need to be changed. So I guess what I'm really asking is there talk to get this on more of a,
Yes.
do a little of each time rather than try to separate it out?
Yes, there was talk of that, and I'm trying to draw from my memory bank from all the 600 bills that I heard about. There was a bill where there was a suggestion that we propose a constitutional amendment that would look at the structure and create a salary system for the legislators. I don't think that went anywhere. I'm just trying to remember where it is, but it would require a constitutional amendment to have something more than what we do now. And that sometimes some people view that as a heavy lift, and some of the elected officials who were asked to vote on those proposals feel uncomfortable doing so because they think it appears to be self-serving or enriching, I guess you might say. And I don't view it that way, and in part because people in Los Alamos County, for sure, I think get what you are talking about, John. And I hear a lot from various groups with whom I speak that we need a system where there's more than this very short period of time when we're looking at bills and review.
Well, a lot of Americans, we're kind of the exception.
Yeah. I think we're maybe one of the last states that have this so-called part-time unpaid, well, I guess we call them, it makes it sound better when you say we're a citizen legislature. But we're one of the few states that has continued with this system, truthfully. And I think eventually if we want to move forward, and we want diversity in the legislature as well. I mean, there are a number of people who are older than me who have been there, because they're retired or they have their own businesses and they have the flexibility to be able to do what they do. But we also want people who are in their 30s. We have a few now, but I spoke to them during the session. How are you doing? They're exhausted. Because I have a friend who was a newly elected legislator. She's a young lawyer, 33-year-old lawyer. She's got a practice she's got to tend to. You can't just leave your clients hanging for 2 months. And so she was, some of them are pretty exhausted. I sit next to Damon Eli, who still has a law practice, and he's juggling a lot of balls in terms of just keeping his clients happy. And he actually ran down one day to attend a hearing before coming back to the floor. And that takes a lot out of you. So we do need a system where people can serve without penalty, personal financial penalties. And we'll see how that goes. It is discussed periodically. I think David, and then I'll get to you, sir. Okay. I look at my watch.
So I want to thank you for pushing SB 11 through.
Oh yeah,
gross
important
receipts,
bill.
Taxability, and obviously that was very important to Los Alamos. I don't know where we would be without that tax base.
And the state, let's not forget that. It's all part of our package to try to make sure we have sustained revenue stream.
And when you mentioned about the governor being very collaborative, it was, maybe you could talk a little bit about how there was a governor's staff that sat down with you guys and said, okay, here's how we can come up with a better, and I think that's one of the reasons, and also from the Republican side, that gave such a strong support for it that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Sure. So the governor has tax advisors, you would expect that she would, and also Jason Harper had spoken to some of the governor's tax advisors. So, Jason's a great guy. He comes and he says, I'm concerned about this bill. I think there's a constitutional issue. I've spoken to so-and-so, and I'm really concerned about it. And so we got the bill as it was originally drafted through Tax and Rev without any problem. But I listened to Jason. I said, okay, Jason, I call the advisors, one of whom's the governor's advisor, and we have a meeting. And they say, look, this is a good bill, but it will be a better bill if you do thus and such to it. It will make it bulletproof, if there is such a thing, in terms of any kind of constitutional challenges or any sort of issues associated with singling out a single entity or two entities and that kind of thing. I said, okay. So we come up with some language, we work with the governor's advisors. I talked to Jason, hey Jason, are you good with this? And he's like, okay, I can live with this is good. You know, this is how we should function, guys, you know, right? I mean, this is like an example of just how to do it, you know, instead of digging your heels in and say, well, I can get it through, which I could have, you know, I could have gotten that bill through just as it was. We had the votes to do it, we would have gotten it through. But this way, everybody has bought into it. We've got some 60 odd members. Not everyone was on the floor when that vote came through, but we got over 60 votes for that on the House side. And so it was collaborative. And then the governor was happy to sign it too. And in fact, when she invited us to the signing ceremony, she said, I'm really glad you worked with our staff on this. This is a better bill. You know, thank you. And so, you know, really that is how we should all be working. If we could do more of that, it would be wonderful. But that was a sign of some collaborative. That was great. Sir, I said I'd answer your question.
I have a question about the lodging tax
Yeah.
that you spoke of.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously in Los Alamos we have a housing shortage, and that includes short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
Does that bill affect individuals who, I know there's a lot of people in town who have an extra room in their house
Right.
or two. Does it affect them? And also, if it does, do you think that'll hurt our supply even further?
It only will if it's a short-term rental. So short-term rental is defined as less than 30 days. So I know that a number of people in town rent like rooms to postdocs, but those are more than 30 days generally. So it really is intended to get people here who, you know, to address someone who might be considered in competition with hotels, right? Do I think it will change things? No. Because frankly, it applies everywhere in the state. So where are you going to go? You can come here, or you can live off the hip. You know, you're going to make your decisions based on what's more convenient for you and what your personal preferences are in terms of, do you want to drive 45 minutes or not, and that kind of thing. So no, I don't think it will change how people are doing business. Katie.
I just want to say one thing to that, which is that Lodgers Tax Advisory Board is working on how we're going to implement
Oh, okay, great.
in the county, so you could take questions to them maybe. And I had a question for you, which was,
Sure.
Were there any bills that made it to the governor that didn't get signed that you were disappointed about, or?
You know, not hugely, I would say. Not really. I mean, I was trying to think of a couple things. We changed the law on parole and probation, and don't ask me the details of that because they're faint in my mind, and she vetoed that, claiming technical issues. So I'm not sure what the story is with that, but generally not. You know, I give her a lot of credit for essentially deferring to the legislature in terms of things. Of course, we worked with the staff so that often bills were changed to accommodate some of the executive branch's concerns. And I will say the department secretaries, those that were appointed or about to be appointed, they were great to work with also. And they would come and talk to people about bills. So I was working on a prevailing wage bill that got stuck in the Senate. And Bill McCamley, who's the Workforce Solutions Secretary, I talked to him a number of times on the phone on things to change the bill, as did some of my, the public interest groups that were interested in it. So when there were issues with bills, often the governor's staff would try to work with us to modify them in a way that would make them acceptable to the governor. And certainly that was one example where Workforce Solutions. The tax secretary, great, I'm really excited about her. And she was I had a bill that frankly the tax department didn't like, but and she told me why, and she said she would probably oppose it, but we had a discussion about it. And frankly, it had to do with how we tax pipelines, and it was an issue that Rio Revo was really concerned about. And it appears that maybe we're undervaluating pipelines and that kind of thing. And she has committed. It was a way for me to bring an issue forward. Frankly, I didn't expect to get it through. But now it's on the secretary's radar, and she has promised me that she's going to work on it to ensure that the revenues are coming in, that Rio Arriba and other, oil-producing counties. There is a little bit of oil and gas in Rio Arriba County, and and she promised me that she was going to work on it, and if she didn't get it accomplished, feel free to bring the bill back, and she'd be working with me on it. So, that's how people should work. It's great. It's a way to, sometimes you drop a bill just to get the dialogue going. It's not going to get through, but it's a way to bring it to the public's attention. And frankly, the Rio Reba officials that I were working with felt like they were listened to, and that's a good thing. So, even when you lose, sometimes you win. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Given the fact that the oil and gas tax revenue fluctuates so much, it seems to me that the state is always reactionary towards that.
Right.
I'm wondering, what are we doing to moderate that so that we can take 20 years and see what the income is? How can we better moderate that?
Well, we have something called the Rainy Day Fund, and it's not the Permanent Land Grant Fund, which people love to call, well, some people in the Senate especially like to call the Rainy Day Fund. That's not the Rainy Day Fund. There actually is something that state legislators call the Rainy Day Fund, and it's a reserve fund with the idea that we should be taking some of the oil and, monies that are mostly oil and gas and putting them in a fund so that we can use that to level out, budget crises. And unfortunately, the crisis was so bad a couple of years ago, we needed even bigger support. But we're building that fund back up. That was part of our budget effort. But as I said, diversifying how we do taxation, and my view is we need a more progressive income tax. And we need to be looking at other kinds of mechanisms, not just relying on GRT, which I think is going to hobble us if we continue to just increase GRT as a way to create revenue for the state's infrastructure and other needs. So, well, it was great talking with you. I'm going to go run down now and learn about water law in Santa Fe. So, thank you.
Just two things that I want to also mention. I'd like to congratulate Karen Momika, who got a nice new title of Executive Director at Aspen Ridge, so congratulations. And then I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Eufemia Bernal Rios. None of this would ever happen if it weren't for Eufemia, so thank you.